Welcome back to Universal Insight. Please subscribe to my channel and press the bell icon for more updates.
This is why you need to understand the Supreme Court's latest ruling. On October 3, 2025, Washington was tense. The city's usual hum was replaced by a sense of anticipation, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for history to unfold. The Supreme Court was about to release a decision that would shake the nation to its core, a ruling that had been the subject of heated debate for weeks. The case, centered on presidential authority, became a symbol of the country's deep divisions. People from all walks of life gathered outside the court, their faces etched with anxiety and hope. When the 6-3 ruling dropped, it was a thunderclap, affirming broad executive power and sending shockwaves nationwide. The news spread instantly, igniting passionate reactions across the country. The conservative majority's decision was seen as a bold endorsement of presidential authority, even in controversial circumstances. Critics called it unprecedented, while supporters hailed it as a necessary check on bureaucracy. For many, it felt less like a legal ruling and more like a political statement, deepening the nation's divides. The streets outside the court became a microcosm of America's fractured identity. The so-called Trump firing case was about a federal employee, but its implications were far-reaching. It raised questions about the limits of presidential power and the future of federal protections. Gun rights advocates saw the ruling as a dangerous precedent, fearing it could enable sweeping executive actions on gun control. Their anxiety was palpable, as if a new threat had suddenly emerged. The decision wasn't about guns, but suddenly, it was all about guns. The conversation shifted overnight, with gun owners and activists bracing for what might come next. News outlets and social media erupted with outrage and speculation. Every headline, every tweet seemed to add fuel to the fire, amplifying the sense of crisis. The 6-3 split was cited as proof of the court's politicization. Critics argued that the judiciary was no longer above the fray, but a player in the nation's political battles. For gun owners, the ruling sounded like a warning shot, a sign that a new battle for their rights had begun. Conversations in homes and gun clubs turned to strategy and uncertainty. The balance of power, once carefully maintained, now seemed more fragile than ever. America stood at a crossroads, its future uncertain, its divisions laid bare for all to see. For gun rights supporters, the Supreme Court's decision felt like a betrayal. Though not directly about firearms, the ruling opened the door to potential executive overreach. Gun rights groups warned that the court had handed any president a blank check to restrict gun rights through executive action. The fear a president could now bypass Congress and target the Second Amendment. Outrage spread quickly, fueling grassroots organizing and calls for state-level action. The ruling transformed a technical legal question into a fierce, emotional fight over the future of gun ownership in America. The backlash was immediate and fierce. Across the country, the news sent shockwaves through communities, igniting a sense of urgency and outrage among gun rights supporters. Gun rights leaders called the decision a direct threat to constitutional order, warning that it undermined the very foundation of American freedoms. They described it as a declaration of war on American gun owners, fueling a sense of betrayal and defiance. Mobilization followed. Protests, fundraising, and calls to action swept across the country. Social media buzzed with organizing efforts, and local chapters sprang into action overnight. The movement, often fragmented, now united around this single issue. Long-standing divisions faded, as activists found common cause. The court's ruling became a rallying cry, fueling anti-government sentiment and a renewed determination to defend individual liberties. It sparked a push for self-reliance, with families preparing for uncertain times and communities organizing for mutual support. Leaders warned, if the president can fire at will, what's to stop them from disarming citizens at will? The fear of unchecked power grew. The irony stung. Conservative justices had empowered a presidency that could one day be used against their own supporters, raising difficult questions about loyalty and principle. The debate shifted from partisanship to a fundamental struggle for the republic's soul, with citizens questioning the future of American democracy. The uprising was no longer just about guns, it was about stopping the rise of an unchecked presidency and defending the balance of power. The fight had moved from the courtroom to the streets and statehouses as citizens demanded accountability and reform. For many, this was the beginning of a new era of resistance, a movement determined to protect not just gun rights but the very fabric of American democracy. Legal scholars quickly dissected the ruling's long-term impact, debating how it would reshape the balance of power in Washington for years to come. By embracing the unitary executive theory, the court gave the president sweeping control over the executive branch, consolidating authority in ways not seen in recent history. The dissent warned this would erode checks and balances and weaken federal accountability, raising alarms about the future of democratic oversight. Gun rights advocates feared the precedent could let a president direct agencies like the ATF to restrict gun rights by executive order, bypassing the usual legislative process. The ruling made it easier for a president to declare emergencies and bypass Congress on gun policy, potentially changing how quickly new regulations could be imposed. Legal challenges to such orders would now face a court that had signaled deference to executive power, making it harder for opponents to overturn presidential actions. The legal landscape had shifted, future cases would be harder to win, and the path to judicial relief more uncertain than ever before. Gun rights groups realized the judicial backstop they relied on was no longer secure, forcing them to rethink their strategies and advocacy efforts. The decision's real-world impact: every gun owner now faced greater uncertainty, unsure how future executive actions might affect their rights and daily lives. The precedent set a new, troubling standard for presidential authority, leaving the nation to grapple with the consequences of expanded executive power. The ruling put the Supreme Court under a harsh spotlight. Conservatives who championed the justices now questioned their commitment to the Second Amendment. The decision blurred the line between judicial principle and political calculation. Landmark cases like Heller and Bruen affirmed gun rights, but this new precedent created a backdoor for executive overreach. Future nominees will face scrutiny not just on gun rights, but on their views of presidential power. The gun rights lobby will demand judges who limit executive authority, as well as defend the Second Amendment. The legal fight is now about both gun rights and the boundaries of federal power. The future of the Second Amendment is more uncertain than ever. The Supreme Court's decision has forced a national reckoning. It's not just about guns, it's about the balance between liberty and executive power. Many Americans now fear the concentration of power in the federal government. Faith in democratic institutions is shaken, fueling polarization and extremism. The need for honest dialogue about constitutional values is urgent, but the space for it is shrinking. The path forward demands renewed civic engagement and a commitment to the ideals of a constitutional republic. The Supreme Court has ruled, but the American people will shape what comes next. The future of rights and democracy depends on how the nation responds to this pivotal moment.